one of the really helpful tools that we've been using is around how we support each other to develop into leadership. This is a tool that we call the Leadership Square. And the one that we use really is based on the life of Jesus, but it's a teaching technique that's used in a whole range of educational settings, and particularly in medical practice, when people are having to actually do something and learning how to do something and be competent in it. So I'm going to show it us from the Jesus perspective, but we all have to learn to do something new for the first time, and we need somebody to teach us, and Jesus is known as our teacher. And so in this first posture of teaching, what happens is that Jesus effectively says, oops, wrong way around, I do, you watch. And in this posture of leadership, Jesus is saying, come and see, come with me, come and be with me, and watch what I do. Jesus is performing the signs of wonders. Jesus is articulating the ways and the wisdom of God. And then as the disciples and Jesus journey more deeply and intimately together, as time goes on, the language of Jesus and the posture of him as a teacher changes to, in some aspects of their life together, I do, you help. So there's moments where he sends the disciples ahead of him. So he'll say, you go on ahead, and there's this kind of partnership as they begin to be part of praying for people, they begin to be part of those journeys. And this is where Jesus is still in charge. Jesus is setting the direction, he's giving the clarity, but the disciples are invited into practically being part of that. And then you come to this space where the leadership starts to shift, and instead of that I do, it's you do. And Jesus's posture is I help. So this is the L3 space. So an example of this is when Jesus sends out the 72. He gives them clarity about what they are to do, what they're to take with them, what their ministry is. They go out, they come back and they debrief. And so they are the ones who are leading in the mission, in the ministry, and Jesus is there as the backstop. He's the encourager, he's the coach, and he supports them. And then you have this incredible space where from Jesus, it's a you do, I watch. The incredible gift of Jesus' ascension, his resurrection, the commissioning, go out into all the world, make disciples of every nation, baptize them. There's this sending that happens, that from this journey of beginnings, the disciples, through their whole training by Jesus, come to this place where they themselves are the bearers of the gospel. And what happens in this journey is that the posture of the leader and the posture of the one learning has to change as this progression happens. And what happens from the disciples' perspective is that here you are unconsciously incompetent. So you have, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know. For the disciples, they don't know what it is that they can't do. So you have a sense of high enthusiasm, but low skill. So when the disciples go and follow Jesus, they go with that enthusiasm, they leave everything to follow him. They don't have the kind of the skills of the kingdom skills that Jesus is training them into. Then from here, what happens at this moment is that you have, you become consciously incompetent. So this is the point when you realize what you can't do, when you realize actually how challenging life is, in that space of critique and battle that Jesus is in, and the competency in terms of speaking about the ways and the wills of God, perceiving and understanding, and also the miraculous signs and wonders. There is this sense of incompetence. So what happens here is that you still have relatively low skill because it's not been fully developed yet, but you also now have low enthusiasm. And this is known as the learning pit. And this happens in all aspects of learning. In the learning pit, in our biblical sense, we might call it the valley of the shadow of death. The challenge is that when you come along here, what can happen is that going in to the D2 experience is very painful, because it's where your sense of confidence is lost, and where your sense of shame will grow, and shame then makes you hide. And so what happens is you can tend to then go back this way. You go back to find something else new, go back to find something that you know. And we see that pattern in the life of some of the disciples, and we see that in our own lives. But moving from there, if we manage to push through here, so for the leader at this point, the leader needs high access. The disciple needs to have a high access to the leadership's life, so that there is enthusiasm, there is encouragement, there is nurture here to help people come through the learning pit. When you do that, in terms of getting to L3 and D3, what you have here is you become consciously competent. And this is where you've gained some of the skills now. So now you're actually beginning to have the skill is being formed. And so therefore the enthusiasm is returning. Because your confidence returns, your sense of self returns. So when the 72 come back, they come back rejoicing. They come back rejoicing with Jesus. But then the move from here to the final one is you become unconsciously competent. So when we're driving a car, not many of us who've been driving for a long time think about how we drive. We just know how to drive. It's become an innate way of being, an innate way of perceiving. And that's the aspect that we get to with that final D4, where we no longer need the coaching, the reaffirmation of the person who's taught us, because it's just become the way that we are. And the gift here is that this becomes our own expression. So throughout here, let's change colours. You have imitation. So you're learning to imitate, but then when you get to here, this is where you have innovation. And so the church is imitating Jesus, imitating the apostolic energy, but there's also innovation. This is then you own it in your own way. How do we each individually step into that calling in Christ?